Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil S. Harrison. You're listening to Season 3, Episode 9. All episodes are available in both video and podcast format at myweekinbaseball.com or subscribe on YouTube at My Week in Baseball. As always, a couple of acknowledgments. First to Rose Petal Studios for the artwork and logos created for this show and website. Learn more at rosepetalstudios.com. And second, thanks to Brunjo Productions in Nashville for our intro music. Learn more at brunjo.com. Well, fans, today we've got Tarik Skubal's 200th strikeout and a shot at the Cy Young Award, how to play for both teams in the same game, the White Sox historic losing streak, and the best catch of the year? Well, Michael Harris II makes a tremendous catch, and we'll talk about that. Of course, we'll also have a timely limerick, our baseball limerick, and a trivia question along the way. So let's get right to it. So Tarik Skubal of the Detroit Tigers has passed 200 strikeouts for the year. On the last day of August, Skubal pitched another brilliant game, this time against the Red Sox. 8 innings pitched, only 4 hits, not a single walk, 1 run, and 8 strikeouts. And that put him over 200 strikeouts for the season, something that is exceedingly rare and will be part of today's trivia question. So let's take a little bit of a look at Skubal and his Cy Young Award quest. But before that, I will mention that Will Lecht of MLB wrote an article on the best players by age. This was published in late August on MLB.com. And he lists Tarik Skubal as the best 27-year-old player. So that is tremendous. You're going to want to read this article. Search MLB.com for best player at each age. That will get you to the article. He starts out with the youngest player in his age group, 20-year-old Jackson Chourio, outfielder for the Brewers, and all the way through every age of everybody playing, up to age 44, of Rich Hill, left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. But let's get on to Skubal's quest for the Cy Young Award. So let's just take a little bit of a look at Skubal's stats for this season thus far, and I'm recording this on September 3, 2024. At this point, he leads the American League in wins with 16. He's 16-4. He has, of course, the best winning percentage, 800. He also leads in earned run average at 2.51, and he leads in strikeouts at 201 strikeouts for the year. He also leads in ERA plus at 166, meaning he's 66% better in earned runs allowed than the typical pitcher. And he leads the league in FIP, fielding independent pitching, which is a measure, of course, of the runs you're giving up on the things that a pitcher can control, which are essentially strikeouts, walks, and home runs. And in FIP, he leads at 2.60, which is very close to his actual ERA of 2.51. He's been tremendous. He's striking out close to 11 batters per 9 innings, 10.7. He's only walking 1.8, so that in itself is tremendous. And of course, he was an all-star this year. But if we take a look further at some of the pitching leaders, he is all over the place on the leaderboard. So I already talked about win-loss percentage. That's probably pretty trivial because wins and losses, we know there's a lot of luck involved there, and it does have a lot to do with the rest of your team and how far you pitch in the game. But he is leading he is leading the American League in strikeouts. He is also leading the American League in WAR, wins above replacement for a pitcher, at 5.7. The next closest is Eric Fed of the Chicago White Sox, believe it or not, who we're going to talk about later in the broadcast, at 4.9. And then Seth Lugo of the Kansas City Royals, of surprising Kansas City, at 4.2. He leads in earned run average, as I mentioned, at 2.51. There isn't really anybody close who qualifies. Blanco of the Houston Astros is second in the league at 3.03. So he's far and away the leader in earned run average. Leads in the wins with 16. The next closest, several players tied at 14 right now. Francisco Barrios of the Blue Jays, Lugo of the Royals, and Carlos Rodon of the Yankees at 14 wins. He's leading in some other categories as well. And some of these categories are newer statistical categories. You may or may not care that much about the category per se, but what is important is that he is leading in all of these. So he's leading in a category called adjusted pitcher runs, which is supposed to show the pitcher's total contribution to a team, with 0 as being like average, league average, and he's at 31, which is leading the league. So he's leading the league in some typical categories as well as some newer statistical categories, and I think he's got a really good shot. There are a couple of people who are close to him, say in strikeouts, but he's way above in earned run average. He's way above in wins above replacement. I think he, at least for the American League, really looks like the top pitcher this year. So congrats to Tarik Skubal, and we will wish him well as the season progresses. So that now, talking about Skubal, and he gets the mention because of breaking the 200 strikeouts for the year, and that leads us to this week's trivia question. And I'm going to give credit for the idea for this question to Jason Beck, who is the Tiger Beat newsletter writer. And I urge you to subscribe to that, which you can do through MLB.com. But here is your question for today. So prior to Tarik Skubal, only 3 Tiger left-handed pitchers have ever reached 200 strikeouts in the history of the franchise. Only 3. So credit to you if you can name at least one of them, and we will have the answer for you later in today's broadcast. Next up, so this one is from my nephew with some details from CBSSports.com. So here is a question, and is it possible to play for both teams in the very same game? The answer, of course, is yes. But has it ever happened before? And the answer to that is no. So on August 26th of this year, the very first time it happened was catcher Danny Jansen became the first player ever to play for both teams in the very same game. And that was the Red Sox versus the Blue Jays. So what happened was back in June, there was a game suspended due to rain. And at that time, Danny Jansen was the starting catcher for the Blue Jays in that game. In fact, as we'll learn a little later, Jansen was actually at bat when the game was suspended. So they're now going to continue the game in August to finish up that game. Well, since that time, Jansen was traded from the Jays to the Red Sox. So now, according to MLB rules, and I'll read this as a quote, a player who was not with the club when the game was suspended may be used as a substitute. So that's indeed the case. At the time the game was suspended, Jansen was on the Jays. But now he can be used as a substitute for his new team, the Red Sox. And he really has to be, because the catcher who was playing for the Red Sox at the time the game was suspended was Reese McGuire, who has since been optioned to AAA. So he isn't even on the team. So they bring Jansen in to catch for the Red Sox. Now, here's the part, and this information comes from my brother, who alerted me to the fact that Jansen was actually at the plate for the Jays when the game was suspended, and there was a 0-ball, 1-strike count. So what do you think happens? Well, the Jays had to bring in a pinch hitter because Jansen's no longer on their team. So Dalton Varsho, who's actually an outfielder, took Jansen's spot in the Toronto lineup for the continuation of this game. So Jansen comes in with a count of 0-1. He fouls off the first pitch he sees, 0-2. He fouls off the next pitch he sees, so still 0-2. And then finally, he swings and misses. It's strike 3. So here's the question to you. Who does that strikeout count against? Or for, however you want to think about it. Well, in this case, the strikeout goes against Dalton Varsho, who was replacing Jansen in the lineup. And that's because it started off 0-1, meaning only one pitch had been thrown. That way, the entire at-bat, even though there's already one pitch into the count, the entire bat counts against the new hitter or for the new hitter, either way. If the count had been 0-2, however, if there had been already two pitches thrown, already two strikes on the batter, then the strikeout would have gone against Jansen, which would be crazy. A new batter comes in, strikes out, and you, the previous batter, are the one who struck out. The rules can get crazy, and suspended games can get crazy. So I will say this is not the first time ever that a player has played for two different teams on the same day, and that has sometimes happened in a doubleheader. If a player is traded between games of a doubleheader, or it could also happen if a player is traded early in the day and plays for one team and then has to maybe go to another city, but he gets to the other city in time for, say, an evening game. He could play for that game. Those kind of things are exceedingly rare, but this is the very first time ever that a player played for both teams in the very same game. So next up, Limerick, our baseball limerick that we have every episode. And this time it's going to be a tribute to Danny Jansen's bizarre achievement. So here we go. A game suspended for rain. A trade to the Red Sox domain. Though he caught for the Rays, on the Sox he now plays. Jansen caught for both teams, same game. Next up, something to honk about. So in this case, I'm going to honk about the White Sox tying a losing streak, the longest losing streak in American League history. So for the Chicago White Sox, from about mid-July to the beginning of August this year, 2024, they lost 21 straight games, which ties the worst stretch in American League history. How could you be a fan of that team? Remember when the Tigers lost, 19 games not too many seasons ago? It's just painful. So only one team in Major League history ever had a worse string than that, and that was in the National League. The 1961 Phillies actually lost 23 in a row. So historically poor performances. But in fact, the White Sox this year are so bad that 3 times in 2024, 3 times this year, they have lost 10 or more games in a row. 3 times? And this is the first since the 65 Mets that a team has been that horrible. And they also set a team record, the White Sox, by losing 10 straight games at home. Oh, what if you were a season ticket holder? Wow, I think you'd be passing those tickets off to friends or family members or anyone you might pass in the street. So at the time of this broadcast, which is again September 3, 2024, the White Sox had a record of 31 wins and 108 losses. They've already lost well over 100 games. And they are on a pace, according to my calculations, they are on a pace to lose 126 games. If they do that, they will crush the record of losses in a season since 1900, held now by the 1962 New York Mets, who of course were an expansion team. These White Sox are not an expansion team. This is ugly. So let's just run through a few statistics about how could the White Sox possibly be this bad? How could they look like they're very likely to be the worst team in history, at least since 1900. Well, here we go. The White Sox are last in baseball in runs scored by nearly 100. Nearly 100 fewer runs scored than the next worst offensive team. They are also last in home runs. They are last in on-base percentage, a paltry 277. That's not a batting average. That's how often they get on base. They're also second to last in batting average at 219, which surprisingly is 3 points above the Mariners. The Mariners, of course, changed managers recently. That might be a topic for another episode, or how they end up finishing. They were a team that was in playoff contention and has really dropped out. So the Chicago White Sox are actually 3 points at 219, 3 points above the Seattle Mariners. And on the pitching side, the Chicago White Sox have the second worst earned run average. They're also second worst in runs allowed and WHIP, walks and hits per inning pitched. Can you guess the team that's worse? They're only second worst. Who's worse than the White Sox in pitching? Guess what? It's the Colorado Rockies. And the White Sox are third worst in home runs allowed. So I guess you could look at it this way. On the bright side, the White Sox do have better pitching than they have hitting. Ha! Whew. Okay. Next up, the catch of the year. So details on this, the catch of the year, come from watching a video clip over and over, me watching that clip, and on an article by MLB writer Mark Bowman. So very recently, on August 31, the Atlanta Braves were playing in Philadelphia, and Michael Harris II, who plays center field for the Atlanta Braves, makes a fabulous catch against the Phillies. Austin Hayes is at the plate for the Phils, and he clubs a long drive off Braves pitcher Max Fried, who appears certain the ball is going out by his demeanor. You can see him just turn and look, and he just sees that ball heading to the wall. He sees his outfielder nearly standing at the edge of the wall. But at the last moment, Michael Harris II times this perfectly. He leaps above the wall, which is it's really a fence that's heavily padded. But he leaps above the wall, above the fence, and he balances his body at his hip. So this will be at his left hip. It's directly on the wall, and he lays across the wall, balancing like a pivot point, balancing on his hip. And he extends his right arm. So he's a left-handed hitter, left-handed fielder, and so the glove is on his right hand. So he extends his right arm and reaches as far as possible as he can into the bullpen and catches the ball and nearly falls over the fence. Remember, he's balancing, nearly falls over the fence into the bullpen, but somehow he manages to regain his balance and he drops back feet first onto the field. The pitcher, again, Max Fried, breathes a sigh of relief and raises his cap in tribute. And this certainly is a top catch of the year and perhaps one of the all-time best catches at the wall. If you'd like to see it yourself, search for Catch of the Year. And this brought to mind for me a question in my own mind. Is he always this good? How is Michael Harris II on defense? Well, he is highly rated in defensive runs saved and outs above average, which are two of the key measures for defensive plays. Although I was surprised to find that some measures show his range is on the low side, meaning he may not get to as many balls as some other players, but apparently when he does, he's terrific. So let's take a quick look at some defensive stats for Michael Harris II of the Braves. So he is just 23 years old. He has been playing since age 21 for the Atlanta Braves. And when I look at his stats, and in this first bit of information is coming from baseballreference.com, under defensive runs saved, and 0 is kind of like league average. So on defensive runs saved, he is showing 6 for the year, 15 for his career, so certainly better than average. But on total fielding runs above average, curiously, BaseballReference.com shows him as a slight negative, -1 for the year, which would just be a tick below average, and -3 for his career. So that seemed a little curious. I think we'll find other measures are more complementary. His range factor, the number of balls he gets to per 9 innings, 2.25. The league range factor per 9 innings, 2.54. So, and I'm looking at this as a center fielder. He has occasionally played other spots, but I'm looking at this as a center fielder. Defensive runs saved good, range factor more modest. But now if I go to another site, and I feel like especially for all the site, in my opinion at least, almost every statistical site you go to has good information about offense, batting performance. But it's hard to get a single place to me that has good information on defense. I like to, if I am looking at defense, I like to look at more than one place. So the other spot I went to for this broadcast is to look at Fangraphs.com, which they have all kinds of statistics and projections if you're playing a fantasy league, all types of information. But under the advanced fielding section for Michael Harris II, things look really, really good. So they have a statistic called fielding run value, which is how valuable he is in preventing runs. And this is also supposed to include not just catching the ball, but range, arm strength, throwing the ball. It's supposed to kind of include all of that. And fielding run value, Michael Harris II this year is showing as a +6 and a +23 in his career, which is really quite good. And in ultimate zone rating, he is also shown as a really positive number. So this is another way of measuring defense. He's shown positive 1.6 for the year and over 11 for his career. So, and defensive runs saved, they also show, which this is similar to Baseball Reference, but defensive runs saved also show him, in this case, here they show him as positive 7 for the year and 17 for his career. So in my view, overall, excellent defender, somebody you would certainly want to have on your team. And here's the interesting thing about him. He's also a very good hitter. So Michael Harris II, having played 3 seasons for the Braves, actually looks like all of them as a center fielder or pinch hitter when I look at this closely. In 2022, his rookie year, he did win Rookie of the Year in the National League. Overall, he's a career .282 batting average, and his on-base plus slugging .783, which is 12% above average overall. And he, over 162 games, according to Baseball Reference, he would average 22 home runs. He's got 9 this year. He's been out hurt part of the year because he's only played in 85 games this year. But 18 home runs last year, 19 home runs the year before. Never quite played 162 games, a high point of 138 games last year. But he's been quite good. So a really good offensive player, really good defensive player. This is a guy you want to have on your team. And I would urge you to go and check out that place. Search for best catch of the year and take a look at that video, because balancing on that wall, you see guys leap and make catches at the wall, above the wall, over the wall, but you do not see them lean over, balance over, practically fall into the bullpen, making the catch. It's really tremendous. So last up, the answer to today's trivia question, and I'm actually going to go into a little more detail about that as well. But the trivia question, if you remember, was besides Tarik Skubal, who reached 200 strikeouts this year. This is a great accomplishment. The question, of course, is who are the other 3 Tiger left-handed pitchers other than Skubal who have ever done that? And I'm going to give you credit if you can name one of them. So I get the names from Jason Beck's Tiger Beat newsletter. And then we'll look at maybe a little bit more on some of this. So the most recent player to do it was in 2019. And the Tigers, as you'll remember, really weren't good in 2019. That was Matthew Boyd. That's the most recent player. And prior to Matthew Boyd, this is a name you will certainly know, Mickey Lolich. And Mickey Lolich is really notable, especially in this he's really notable overall as a Tiger pitcher historically. But in this particular category of 200 strikeouts, Mickey Lolich did it 7 times. He did it 7 times. He even broke 300 strikeouts once back in 1971. So that is terrific. And if you go back a bit further, the other Tiger left-hander to have hit the 200 strikeout mark was pitcher Hal Newhouser, and he did this twice back in the mid-1940s. So we'll take just a quick look at each of these 3 guys. Matthew Boyd, of course, the most recent in 2019, as I mentioned. He wasn't especially good that year, but the Tigers really had a lousy season. He was 9-12 with a 4.56 ERA, but in 185 innings, he did manage to strike out 238 batters. But he also led the league in home runs allowed. So even though he got the strikeouts and certainly was a steady pitcher for the Tigers, it wasn't overall a tremendous season for him or for Detroit. If we look at Lolich, though, and his 7 seasons of doing it, I think I'm going to focus on the season that he struck out 300. Now, this was when pitchers pitched more innings and pitched more games. He won in 1971. He won 25 games and led the league, 25-14, with a 2.92 ERA, 376 innings. He started 45 games. 45 games. Well, these are a 4-man rotation, not a 5-man rotation, or sometimes we have 6-man rotations, or we even see these bullpen games now. So this is back when you pitched more, but he had 308 strikeouts in 376 innings. So it doesn't sound as impressive as strikeouts per 9 innings like we see today. Frequently guys are over 9, more than 1 an inning. But back then, that was not as common. So to break both 300 innings and 300 strikeouts, terrific. And he also led the league in batters faced at that time. So that was Mickey Lolich's great season. And then if we drop back to Hal Newhouser, Newhouser hit 200 strikeouts twice. So I'll mention both of those years. It was in 1945 and in 1946. He led the league in wins and earned run average both of those years. In 1945, he was 25-9 with a 1.81 ERA. In 1946, he was 26-9 with a 1.94 ERA. Terrific numbers. And he did surpass 200 strikeouts both of those years. So if you got any of those 3 right, Matthew Boyd, Mickey Lolich, or Hal Newhouser, I will certainly give you credit for today's trivia answer. So that's all today, my friends. Join us next time, because honestly, what can be better than talking baseball? As always, I'm your host, Phil S. Truth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.